Most of you are probably familiar with the debate about electric cars. Chinese manufacturers like BYD and Geely have taken lead in making and selling battery-powered vehicles. And the United States and the European Union, worried about a flood of imports overwhelming their domestic manufacturers, have imposed tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. However, the batteries that power these cars receive less attention. Here, the People's Republic is even more dominant. In the first half of this year, Chinese manufacturers like contemporary Amperex Technology, known as CATL, and its peers supplied 2/3 of the global market for power cells used in electric cars. That's according to analysts at Bernstein. Can China retain its grip on this crucial technology, or can Western manufacturers find a way to fight back? That's the question we're going to explore on The Big View this week. It's what we do at Reuters Breaking Views. We tap our best sources around the world to bring you fresh insight into the biggest stories on global business and finance. I'm your host, Peter Thar-Larsen. Our guest this week is Siva Sivaram, the president and CEO of QuantumScape, a US-based company which is developing a new battery technology for EVs known as solid-state lithium metal. But first, I'd like to introduce Katrina Hamlin, Breaking Views global production editor and also our in-house expert on the Chinese electric car industry. Katrina, welcome.
Hi.
So you recently researched and wrote a Big View for Breaking Views about this whole question about global batteries. In a nutshell, tell us what you found out.
Well, I decided that China's grip on this industry is very, very tight. And it seems pretty unlikely that it's going to loosen anytime soon because they've got the size, as you alluded to earlier. They can move faster because their home market is so big that it's possible to scale up any given product really, really quickly. They've got brain power and they also control a lot of the raw materials. So that means that the status quo is very sticky unless there is some very distinct change in the dominant technology. And the other thing I found out during this reporting is that that's quite possible, actually.
Yeah, so that's sort of that's the intriguing possibility is that there might be a new technology that comes along or is developed, which then shifts the balance of power to some other manufacturers. So you talked for this podcast to the Dr. Sivaram. What sort of attracted you to him as a guest to speak to?
Well, it seemed to me that he is really in the thick of it because the company that he is now leading is developing what's called solid-state batteries. And when you speak to different people about this industry, and I spoke to a lot of them for this very long story, this is the innovation that they kind of name check as, possibly the next big thing, possibly the disruptor. And on top of that, he's actually very, very new to the battery industry. He's, I'll let him speak for himself about his background, but he comes from another industry where there's also a lot of geopolitical tension and concerns about China's capabilities. And so I knew from the beginning that he would have, a really interesting take on all of these things. And I think, it's worth listening to what he's got to say about it.
Jolly good. Thanks, Katrina. Let's listen to your conversation.
Siva, welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here on the Big View podcast today. Let's start with the big picture. I've been covering electric cars for around a decade now. When I first read about them, this was still kind of a quirky corner of the auto beat. But now battery-powered cars are everywhere. So how did we get here?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's nice to talk about a subject we are all interested in. There are a couple of things that became more prevalent that made this transition possible. On either side of the vehicle, one is the charging infrastructure and the other is batteries. The two had to grow hand in hand for this to become possible. Clearly, on the battery side, lithium-ion batteries literally took the center stage in probably 1993-94 time period and started becoming better and better in terms of performance, quality, safety, but particularly cost over the next 20, 25 years. So starting from 1995 through the arts and early teens, dramatic reduction in cost and increase in performance that helped make this happen. The Tesla first model that came out in 2011 was a digital step upwards that gave the possibility that let people think that, hey, there is a reasonable range that you can have, and it can be charged with some reasonable time and actually can drive it to have fun. And the charging infrastructure hasn't quite kept up with it as much as the battery advancements. But the ability to charge at home at night has made that easier on most people, especially in different geographies where public charging is still not efficient. You can come home and charge overnight for on unreasonable time. Those two together has made this possible.
And I want to ask as well, why is China such an important part of this story?
Yeah, it's funny you should say this. If you had been sitting here in 2006, 2007, 2008, you would never have thought of China as an enabling piece. However, to China's credit, or Chinese planners' credit, they saw the possibility of electric vehicles much more than anyone else did. And there was conscious encouragement from the Chinese policymakers on all aspects of the electric car infrastructure, both in terms of the OEM automobiles as well as on the batteries. Through the supply chain, in technology, in equipment, in sourcing the minerals, making sure that the steady supply of it are from around the world, they thought of it well ahead of time compared to everybody else and put a single-minded focus on it. But then the capstone of this is how fast the battery development happened in China. CATL as a company spun out of ATL in about 2013, 2014. Even now, you know how long it takes to ramp a battery factory from 0 to 1 to 5 gigawatts. It takes 4 or 5 years. In that less than 10 years, they have already commissioned close to 100 gigawatt hours of capacity. The entire focus of being able to do a vertically integrated battery manufacturing with respect to sourcing the materials, the cathode active materials, the electrolytes that go with it, the equipment that needed to put it together, the manufacturing process, the defectivity reduction. China literally wrote the book on very high volume scale manufacturing of batteries. So these multiple things came together with the government incentives on making cars, making batteries, and the two being married together has made China the centerpiece of ours. And the other important point is the domestic marketplace. The Chinese car makers were not counting on an American or European marketplace to make this happen. They targeted cars that were ideally suited for the short distance urban Chinese driver. They needed to have 100 to 150 miles, 200 to 250 kilometers as the target range, and try to get something that they can get those cars in place relatively cheap, meaning the under $10,000 car that they targeted to make that happen. All of this. And oh, by the way, the remaining infrastructure with respect to self-driving cars and all those features all come into play to make the electric vehicles so much more user-friendly in China. So that domestic market, the battery infrastructure, the car-making OEMs being supported by policymakers, together has created a monolith that's driving the electric car industry today.
That was an excellent potted history. And despite your obvious deep knowledge of the sector, you're actually quite new to batteries.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In fact, I believe before you joined QuantumScape, you were working mainly with chips. So what was it that made you make the switch to batteries so recently?
So semiconductors, I was in the business for almost 40 years. I was in this sector of semiconductors called storage, where you make memories. And memory manufacturing is where you store data, right? As opposed to energy storage in battery, you're storing data in those chips. They are high volume production products. So you end up making billions of these chips with a technology that rapidly evolves every 18 to 24 months, even while reducing the cost. So if you had bought an iPhone or any smartphone for that matter, in your lifetime, you have seen it go from 4 gigabytes of memory to 8 to 16 to 64 to 128 to now you can buy a terabyte of memory on that phone, even while the price of that phone hasn't gone up. So I'll give you every 2 years, two times the number of bits for the same price. That's the kind of manufacturing efficiency that is needed. So I became reasonably comfortable with this idea of rapidly evolving technology, taking it into high volume production, getting it into customers' hand at high quality very quickly.
The other thing that struck me is quite similar between the two industries is that they're both sort of in the crosshairs of geopolitics. Has that helped to sort of inform the way that you work with QuantumScape and the way that you lead the company?
Even more than the crosshairs of the geopolitics, the thing that helped me is the intensity of the competition. So we had multinational competitors that were coming in from Korea, Japan, the United States, and China, all coming into that marketplace. So you had to be very comfortable with a intensely competitive marketplace with what we call a high value input producing a commodity output. That is a very unique place. Now, throw on top of it the geopolitical tensions, especially in the semiconductors. I am good with operating in that space, even though, given the vagaries of policymakers around the world, you never count on it. You want to make sure you're able to function well in that environment.
Okay, and I also wondered, why QuantumScape? Because QuantumScape is not making your classic lithium-ion battery. It's doing something quite different, right?
Precisely that. If QuantumScape was just another lithium-ion battery maker, I would not come there. Being a US lithium-ion maker, going into the Chinese, where they are dominating, is like going into a gunfight with a sword. That's not what you want to do. Your differentiator here is technology. The main reason I joined QuantumScape was because I looked at the possibilities of the breakthrough technology that's out there and say, that's the one that I want to take into high volume, that I can go stand toe to toe with anybody else in the world and make money out of it.
And for those of us who are not so familiar with the company's backgrounds, can you explain a little bit more how QuantumScape's batteries and also how solid state batteries more broadly differ from lithium ion?
So we say in the battery space, 5 things are important. There's only 5 things that really make a difference in a battery. I got to have enough range. When I charge it once, I want to be able to drive at least 500 kilometers, if not more, on one charge. That's energy density. The second is I want to have as close to a gas station experience. I go in there and charge, it charges in 15 minutes. How fast can it charge? That's called power density. The third is I want to be able to charge and discharge as many times as the life of the car. The worst thing that you can have is the car, the rest of the car, the steering wheel and the automatic, everything is working, but the battery fails after 100 cycles. That doesn't help. So you want this to cycle at least 1,000 times or 800 times. If you had a 500 kilometers radius and you cycle 800 times, you had the 400,000 kilometer range for that car over the long term, which is a reasonable time for the life expectancy of a car. The fourth is the most important thing among all of that is safety.
Yeah.
You have you're driving with a fully loaded bomb and it's got all the energy and all the chemicals on it and anything can set it off. So you want to make sure you have a car that is safe. And the last is it has to be inexpensive. And those are the 5 things. Energy density, power density, how many times can you cycle, safety, and cost. Currently, a lithium-ion battery does not pass muster on all 5 of them. The reason electric cars are not universally accepted is because one or the other of it is always lacking. It's either too expensive, or occasionally it's unsafe, or it's got range anxiety in people, or it takes overnight for it to charge, or the battery dies out after a few hundred cycles, and now the car is not worth anything. So These are the reasons batteries have get in trouble. A solid state battery, especially one that is made by QuantumScape, excels on all five. And I'll talk with safety first. The simplest way you think of a lithium ion battery is you got a lot of organics and you got a lot of charge. When the thing catches fire, not only is all the energy being discharged that is stored in the battery, you also are setting fire to a lot of organics. The whole thing burns like there's no tomorrow. So we end up having created a battery that is ceramic separated, meaning fully contained, that does not burn like that. An extremely safe battery. If you take the battery and heat it up, it doesn't catch fire. So that's number one. It's a solid state battery that does. The rest of it is a little bit more, as you were saying, a little bit more technically challenging. It is number one that in a typical battery, there are three essential elements: a cathode, where the lithium material is stored, to which you are going to give the energy to, and take it to the anode, which is where, when it is fully charged, that lithium migrates to. And the two are separated by a separator. In a liquid, that space is either a liquid or a semi-solid or a polymer or a ceramic coated polymer. There are many things that are being tried to put this thing in between them. A solid state battery uses, as it says, solids. There are no liquids or gels or any of those. The reason it is done is this. Liquids, which are the default in lithium ion, are naturally very reactive. When you charge it fast or when you put a lot more energy, if you are pushing it past its equilibrium point, they end up reacting with each other, they degrade fast, they don't charge fast. Those kinds of things that the liquids essentially cause it to do. In the QuantumScape architecture of the solid-state battery, there is no anode as created. What that means is, normally in a regular battery, they end up having some material, like a graphite or silicon embedded graphite, into which this lithium ion goes in and quote unquote intercalates, meaning it diffuses in and stays in. And then you take it out. It does many bad things. That graphite or graphite silicon is what in our vernacular we call it spinach. It is not the meat. It just adds space and does not contribute to the energy or actively detracts from ability to charge and discharge fast. That stuff is sole sourced from China. The graphite comes only from China. In many ways, that's not the best place to be. Yeah. In the QuantumScape architecture of it, that spinach, the graphite, silicon stuff that is sitting on the other side, is completely removed. Pure lithium plates on the anode side when it is fully charged and goes away when it is discharged. This is the most energy-dense configuration that you can thermodynamically create. Science says you can't get it any denser than that. That's what makes QuantumScape so much better. And the separator that makes it happen is not a liquid, it's not a gel, it's not a polymer, it's not a polymer that is coated with ceramic. It is a very thin, pure ceramic. That ceramic is so good in suppressing fire. It's good in ability to conduct the ions through. It is so stable that it doesn't degrade when you rapidly charge or discharge. That makes all the difference. So QuantumScape is a ceramic-enabled, solid-state, lithium metal, anode-free battery. I know that's a mouthful, but each of those words mean a lot.
You mentioned that your classic lithium-ion battery does have a certain dependency on Chinese supply chains and also raw materials controlled by China. Are you saying that these sorts of batteries, solid-state batteries, allow the industry to be kind of freed from that dependency?
Yeah, I will say it in a little bit more circumspect fashion because I never say it with absolute certainty in all of these. QuantumScape, the QuantumScape architecture of solid-state batteries gives the best chance of having truly multi-sourced supply chain for all its materials. That it is not dependent on these sole-sourced materials that are the limiter in today's lithium-ion supply chain. The classic example being graphite. I mean, the Infrastructure Act in the US has given money for somebody to go start a graphite factory in the US. It's still years away. It still is not proven. Whereas currently all of the supply comes from China. And QuantumScape does not use it at all. The best way not to be dependent on something is not to use it.
So solid state batteries, or at least specific ways of achieving a solid state battery, do open the possibility of being less dependent on China.
Correct. Now, but there's a subtlety. There are many people doing many other forms of solid state batteries that end up using, some of them use the graphite on this thing, or they use pure lithium metal foils that they deposit on top of it. They're the worst of all worlds. You end up working around it. You are adding cost and sacrificing on energy density. So those are the reason I'm saying the QuantumScape method of doing solid state batteries offers the best opportunity to have a truly multi-sourced supply chain that is not dependent on any one country.
So it's fair to say that this is a very promising technology.
Correct.
And then within that space, there are many individual products that have, their pros and cons. That said, when I speak to my contacts about solid state batteries, I've noticed they kind of fall into two camps. There are the people I talk to who get very excited about this and then tell me it's right around the corner. And then there are the people I talk to who say, well, it is very exciting, but it's been right around the corner for quite a long time. So can you help us to understand that a little bit? Why is it so tricky to get this technology on the roads?
Yeah, it is absolutely true. There is a very famous automotive OEM who promised a solid state battery in 2017 and then said in 2020 and then said 2024 and then said 2027. And this is a very credible company to go do it, and it's a hard thing to do. In all these cases, there is one thing that is common. They all try to take existing technologies and try to re-optimize them for the solid state conditions by either using a anode material or a polymer separator or a sulfide separator or a liquid separator or a gel separator. These things don't have the entitlement, meaning even in their theoretical best case performance, they are not capable. They always degrade in any one of those corner cases when I have the energy higher or when the power higher or the temperature goes away or pressures change. These things don't have the entitlement. QuantumScape is the first time we have come back and shown that this material set, this architecture, you put that together the right way, it has the entitlement. It can give you a very high energy density, a sub 10-minute charging capability, a safe, truly safe battery, and reduces cost by removing an entire line, entire anode gets been removed. Now, why aren't we already in very high volume manufacturing yet? Because industrialization still takes effort. It is not the same as a drop-in replacement to lithium ion. So if somebody was doing lithium ion, they can't come next day and say, okay, remove the liquid out of it and replace it with this, and voila, the rest of the line runs the same. No, the technology has its own uniqueness that you do need to redevelop the manufacturing process. And that industrialization is where we are right now. We are industrializing our proven technology. The technology is proven. We now need to ramp it into volume with a partner that is going to be capable of manufacturing in high volume.
So on a recent conference call, I think you put it like this: we're at the start of the climb to industrialization, which still, sounds like there's a long uphill ahead. So what sort of timeline do you think we're looking at from here to a point where it's common to have these sorts of batteries in cars on the roads?
I'll answer it in two different ways. I'm being very, very careful in my words when I say we are climbing the hill of industrialization and we are starting at it right now. Only because I have been humbled by the manufacturing complexities of very high volume, very low defect many times in my past. And I will never cockily come and say, yep, we got it solved. There are, and I say this word, manufacturing teaches you humility. Having said that, the processes that we need to develop into higher volume are well-proven things. We are not, the science is new, We had to think about developing a lot of electrochemistry, etc. The manufacturing process, however, is a well-known set of things that we need to do. I say this repeatedly. There are three things you do. You do it systematically, meaning you don't take shortcuts. For every problem, there's a system solution. You do it methodically. Methodically means that you take one step, follow it by the next step, follow it by the next step. Iteratively, you go give it to the customer, let the customer test it, come back and tell you what's wrong, fix it. That's what's happening right now. The solid state batteries are going to be in high volume in the late part of this decade. That's the timeline I can give you.
In that explanation, you were very focused on sort of the controllables that you can control, which is great. But obviously there's a lot of other things going on. And in particular, we're all just digesting, what happened in the US elections. And I wondered if I'd asked you that question before the election result, or maybe a couple of years ago before we had this slowdown in demand for battery-powered vehicles, would your answer have been different? Would the timeline have looked shorter?
So this is one of those places, my prior life is a lot more relevant. You have to go watch how cyclical memory prices are. Even though there may be a secular long-term demand for storage, we all need more storage. You'd see that every 18 months, we go into one of those slumps that it looks like nobody wants to buy storage and the prices crash and burn. I've seen this movie many, many times. The electric vehicle conversion is a secular long-term growth story. It doesn't matter what happens in the short term. Over the long term, this will happen. Now, it is going to go through bumps. Even before the election, as you saw, we were coming out of the COVID high and then crashed. The COVID supply chain caused disruptions and demand was so high that everybody misread the market and added overcapacity. This is a classic phenomenon. And then supply catches up with the demand and oh my God, you have built too much supply. And then the prices crash. And then the demand crashes. And then in this case, you put on top of it things like an election uncertainty or policy uncertainty with respect to Chinese imports, or what's happening in Europe, or what happens in Japan, or what happens in South Korea. All these have to be valued in, but long term, this market will grow. If you draw that line, if you ignore the short-term fluctuations on an 18-month time scale, you go look at it farther out, this growth is a solid growth. We will do well in the long term. In a way, I feel happy that I'm not out there in the marketplace today, so I can ride out this storm.
And speaking of growth, I am very naturally focused on cars because that's what I've been writing about for some time. But are there other applications for solid-state batteries?
Yeah. So the two of the top three large consumers of battery today are electric cars, along with all other modes of electric trucks and electric everything else that go with it. And I'm not distinguishing them right now. Followed by stationary storage, meaning utilities, power management in the very short term, in the medium term, and the longer term, meaning minutes, hours, days kind of storage, followed by consumer electronics, including phones and everything else. Those are the top three markets that you would come back. Then there are other evolving markets such as military drones, etc., that are coming up right behind. So as these, the one thing that you would notice in the classic theory of price elasticity is as prices come down, markets that you least expect open up. If I were to go back to my data storage analogy, one day cameras became big and suddenly Kodak and all the liquid film processing disappeared. The next day when it came down, all the CDs got replaced by cards. Then DVDs went away into cars. Then this wonderful invention called iPod came, and suddenly all music in the world was stored in a. And then all the computers started using solid state drives. Now data center uses solid. So as the prices come down, markets open up. Same phenomenon is true in energy storage. There are infinite number of markets that will grow up for solid state batteries because that's the way the future has to grow. You're going to see not just price reduction, safety improvement, performance improvements, weight reduction, range improvements, you're going to see markets open up that you never thought of. Oh my God, why didn't I think of that? Markets will come up.
I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball one more time. This is the time of year when Breaking Views looks to the year ahead and thinks about our predictions for business and finance. So I wondered if I could put you on the spot and ask, what do you think the sort of landmarks for this technology, this industry, are going to be in the year ahead?
So I'm not just talking about QuantumScape right now. I'm talking about in a general sense. I would think that in 2025, at least 2 companies will announce that, they have a solid state battery. And by the end of 2025, somebody will announce that hey, they are planning on a car with solid state batteries before the end of the year. And they won't tell you when, but they are going to say that. And you're also going to see the reversal of the current slump in EVs. EVs are going to again pick up steam in the second half of next year.
Well, I like it. That's a bold prediction. But I have to ask one more question now. So we're going to see 2 companies say that they have solid state batteries and one say that they're going to have a car with a solid state battery.
Car OEM.
Yeah. Are any of those announcements going to come from China, do you think? Or could they come from elsewhere?
I don't think they'll come from China.
Oh, fascinating. Well, I think we might have to speak again another time, perhaps next year, to look back and see what really did happen. Siva, thank you so much for your time today. That's lots of things to chew over. So very glad we managed to get together.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the time, and thank you for putting up with me.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you, Katrina and Siva Sivaram, for that fascinating discussion. This podcast was produced by Katrina Hamlin and Oliver Taslich. You can listen to a new episode of The Big View every Tuesday on the Reuters app or your favourite platform. Don't forget to tune into our sister podcast, The Viewsroom, every Thursday, as well as the other great podcasts from the Reuters team. And if you liked what you heard, please follow The Big View and let us know what you thought. And check out our views on the biggest stories in business and finance every day at breakingviews.com and reuters.com.